From entire fleets of aircraft vanishing into the mist to a massive ship that disappeared without a trace, these Bermuda Triangle discoveries will make your head spin. Up first is a Greenland shark. A shark in the ocean? Now that's surprising. Well, not really, but a shark 4,000 kilometers from home certainly is. It was long assumed that Greenland sharks, well, stayed in Greenland. They're incredibly old sharks, taking more than 100 years to reach maturity and live in deep and cold waters. So why was this one discovered in the relatively warm waters of the Bermuda Triangle? Well, it turns out the seafloor is not flat and uniform. Shocker, I know. But the depths in the Bermuda Triangle can have very sudden drop-offs, perfect for cold water sharks like the Greenland shark to navigate through. It's likely that these sharks are actually much more widespread than we think in the deep seas of the world. Next is the Jacuzzi of Doom. At the bottom of the sea lies the Jacuzzi of Doom, a massive lake of death. These lakes are composed of brine, or very salty water, and so they sink to the very bottom and create these large pools. The only thing is, they're so salty and filled with other toxic chemicals that the water is completely lethal to any fish that enters it. And yet, in the strange world of the deep sea, this pit of despair is actually a hub of life. The salt preserves animals that fall in perfectly for up to hundreds of years, meaning that centuries of debris and detritus collect in these pools. This is the greatest concentration of food that exists in the deep sea, and so attracts a ton of predators who try and brave the toxic shock to pull out a morsel of food. The only issue is that many of these fish that take the risk diving into the brine to pull out a meal end up becoming meals themselves. Next is the Challenger in the deep. The Bermuda Triangle is full of shipwrecks, but one of the most stunning wrecks isn't from the ocean at all, but the outer edges of our atmosphere. The Space Shuttle Challenger was launched January 28, 1986 off the coast of Florida, and almost immediately disaster struck. 2 O-rings in the right solid rocket booster failed, and the entire spacecraft ripped itself to pieces thousands of feet in the sky. The tragedy was horrible, even worse for being streamed through dozens of homes and schools live at the time, but deep at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle lies a stunning piece of the wreckage. A 20-foot long section of one of the boosters was discovered by a group of wreck divers, and now divers are eagerly searching for the rest of the remains of the ship. Next are lionfish. Lionfish are beautiful creatures that I love to dive with long spines and wavy orange fins. They are also one of the most dangerous animals on the planet. Not because they pose much of a threat to us, though the sting is very painful, but because they are simply oppressive hunters and breed incredibly rapidly. In their home waters of Southeast Asia, lionfish are kept in check by a variety of natural predators, though even there they are quite successful. But once the first were released into the Atlantic by idiotic exotic pet owners, the disaster began. Lionfish are difficult to eat in the wild, being covered in toxic spines, and have no natural predators in the Atlantic. They've therefore been utterly devastating to the Caribbean ecosystem, and are now considered one of the most invasive species on Earth. Thankfully, they do taste really good. Next is the USS Cyclops. The USS Cyclops was, in the early 1900s, the biggest ship in the American fleet, so how could it just vanish without a trace on a sunny spring day? At 550 feet long, the Cyclops was huge and was used to ship everything from coal and ore to troops during the First World War. On its fateful final voyage, it was carrying 11,000 tons of manganese, critical in steel production, and shipping it back to America. Its final words as it entered the Bermuda Triangle were, "Weather fair, all is well." Then the ship would vanish without even an SOS signal, indicating whatever happened very quickly. Some hints may come from the other 2 ships of its class, both of which were lost in similarly sudden catastrophes just a year earlier. All 3 were carrying heavy loads of metallic ore when they sank. The current best guess is that the ore and the storage systems were hopelessly outmatched, and the ships all ended up ripping themselves apart once they encountered slightly rough waves. Next is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream was discovered in 1512 as a very powerful current that completely outdid any force the sailors could get from the wind. This warm water current is critical to the local ecosystem, but also ends up carrying water all the way over to Western Europe, which is why England, despite being at the same latitude as Canada, is so much warmer. But this is changing. Climate change is putting more fresh ice water into the sea, which weakens the strength of these global currents. Should the Gulf Stream collapse, not only would the Gulf of Mexico's ecosystem collapse, but Western Europe would enter an ice age. And finally, Flight 19. Perhaps one of the most mysterious disappearances in the Triangle, Flight 19 was a training flight of 5 Avenger torpedo planes that had gone out on a navigation exercise over the Triangle when disaster struck. First, one plane went missing, but as flight lead Charles Carroll tried to recover them, others began to go missing as well. Eventually, in the dark sky over choppy waves of the Triangle, every plane vanished. It's likely a combination of poor training, poor timekeeping and navigation, and poor use of instruments led to the disaster, and it's likely that most of the planes wound up being lost and running out of fuel over the sea, where they then crashed and vanished. Others think that the disappearances must be due to the Triangle's strange anomalous properties instead. What do you think? Dr. Brown discovered a crystal pyramid at the bottom of the sea in the very center of the Bermuda Triangle, and it's completely stunned researchers. Sadly, the original camera was lost soon after in a storm, so the original image is gone, leaving only this grainy image that could be recovered. Now, some may see a grainy image of a deep-sea crystal pyramid and think it's a hoax, but according to the elusive Dr. Brown, this is a very genuine image of some sort of shrine at the very peak of the pyramid. Perhaps this is some sort of signal relay or some magical item that we still do not understand. Next is the Sunken City. In 2001, a team of researchers went out on an expedition to find remains of Spanish colonial era ships that were laden with gold. Instead, they found an even greater treasure, the Sunken City, which was spotted by a sonar imager which uncovered its unusual geometric shapes and layout. Some believe this may have been a coastal city several thousand years ago, a hub of whatever local culture there was. But as the sea rose, the city was abandoned and left to sink. Since then, however, there have been very few expeditions, and no one seems to outright say whether it's a natural or human-made structure. Next is Cotopaxi. The SS Cotopaxi is a cargo ship that had been missing in the Bermuda Triangle for over 100 years. Now it seems to have been discovered. The ship was to deliver coal to Havana, but it never arrived, and the 32 people on board vanished along with it. It turns out the well-known bare wreck is actually the Cotopaxi, and it has since been determined that poorly constructed sealing hatches allowed water in during a rough storm and sunk the coal ship. No Bermuda mystery here after all. Next is the blue goo. Scientists discovered a weird blue goo creature on the seafloor, and so far have absolutely no idea what in the world it is. There are jelly-like creatures in the sea and blue corals that stay on the bottom, but so far no known blue goo jelly balls. This was 2,000 feet under the surface, meaning these jelly balls are under almost 1,000 pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure for such a cute little dude. Maybe he moves sometimes, but he just wants to chill right now. Next is ancient cedar. This discovery completely changed our view of the ocean. A diver discovered the remains of an ancient cedar tree deep under the surface, and it turns out this tree was part of a forest that had been swallowed by the sea more than 10,000 years ago. The cedar even still smelt distinctly of cedar when they brought it to the surface to study. It turns out global sea levels were much more dynamic and rising much more quickly than we thought they did originally. If the sea level rise had been slower, the tree would have died off and been broken down. Instead, the tree was covered in water in the span of just a few years and preserved. Next is the Bermuda USO. Daryl Miklos is a treasure hunter and ocean explorer who has a massive discovery that could shake the foundations of the world. While exploring the Bermuda Triangle in search of shipwrecks and magnetic anomalies, he came across a massive structure over 300 feet long that had pillars and poles extending from it. Seemingly obviously not a natural structure, Daryl believes this to actually be some sort of alien spaceship that he wants to exhume from the Earth to study. Now, I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade, but seeing this image, I have to say, those are barrel sponges. I've done a lot of scuba diving in the Caribbean, and those are definitely just very standard and average sponges that you see all the time under the water. Maybe the unbelievable part is just how confidently wrong people can be? And finally, the species flood. In the past decade, the Bermuda Triangle has been one of the most exciting ecosystems to study on Earth. Researchers keep taking samples of seawater at varying depths, and they just keep on discovering new species. In one sample, they discovered and recorded reported more than 200 species, and it's believed that more than 1,000 new species have been discovered in the Bermuda Triangle in the last decade. To be fair, most of these species are microscopic, but that doesn't dampen the spirits of the biologists involved. For many, this is a race against time to catalog and store the DNA of these creatures before they go extinct for good. Those were unbelievable discoveries found in the Bermuda Triangle that defy explanation. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.